This is a lecture from Open Tuition. For the free lecture notes that go with this podcast, please visit opentuition.com. Now, can I just tell you what the syllabus is basically, the format of the exam? But without talking through the entire syllabus, obviously, but the main areas are, first of all, investment appraisal. And essentially, and I'm sure you all remember the word, even if you can't remember all the arithmetic involved, it's discounted cash flow. And please be honest with me. Even though you may have not practiced it for a while, you all remember the idea, I'm sure. You're thinking of a machine, it costs $500,000, it'll last for 5 years. These are the cash flows. Do you remember? You remember... it wasn't hard, a lot of arithmetic involved. There may have been inflation and you had to inflate the cash flows. There may have been tax. You remember all that? Well, all of that's askable again, and there's virtually nothing extra. All right? The questions are longer, so it might take longer to actually find the information, but that's down to reading and things. But in terms of the techniques, you've already done just about everything. And again, I'm not going to keep saying this, you'll get annoyed, but I say it may be a long time ago, well, it's not that long ago, it may be a while since you practiced it, but you do all remember the idea of it, I think. You know, and it was really a big calculator exercise, inflating your flows, dealing with tax, using discount tables, you know, yeah? So again, you may need a bit of practice, but I don't think we should need to spend half a day going back through. You know, there's a chapter on it, but I really think that's something you should be able to revise yourself. But you're almost, well, you are certain to get a big discounted cash flow question. I'll give you the format of the exam shortly. And I'll say again, technically, it's no harder than F9. It's just, again, there'll be more information. It takes that much longer to read it and so on. Okay? However, that is bound to be a reasonably big bit of the exam, easily 20-30 marks. You know? A second thing is cost of capital. Now, part of this you have done. Again, I will remind you certainly a bit of this. We will need to do a bit of revision. But you should remember, to work out the cost of capital, we worked out cost of equity, cost of debt, a weighted average, you remember? Well, all of that's askable again, and often it's pure F9. Here, though, there are extra bits involved in that you have heard of, for instance, capital asset pricing model. You remember the words, Katerina? Yeah. In F9, it was very basic. In P4, it doesn't get desperately hard, but there are more things you can ask, and obviously I will go through them, and I'll revise the basics. I can't start there in the middle, you know. But there is more on that. You should also, I think you remember something called Modigliani and Miller. At paper F9, all it was a bit of talk. In this paper, it's not going to be massive, but there are some numbers they can bring in, and again, obviously, I'll go through them with you. All right? So, cost of capital, as I say, part of it is pure revision. There are extra bits. We will deal with it. A third area, business valuations, is something I never really, whether we're having a full course, a short course, whatever, it's something I don't really spend much time on until the revision. Because although they can ask you to value a business, if I asked you to put a value on my business, you know, you were thinking of taking me over. Well, there are one or two, I think, very obvious ways. One thing you might look at, you're deciding how much to offer me, yeah? I think you'd agree. One thing you might look at is just the value of the assets. I don't think we need to teach that, you know. What are the assets worth? And surely that's the minimum you really have to offer me. Clearly, you're likely, or I'm likely to want a lot more for the goodwill and so on. Well, theoretically, your best way would be to try and estimate the cash flows from my business and do a net present value. So, there's not really much there at all. It's part what you might call common sense. Look at the value of the assets, which is trivial. The technical bit is back to discounting. That give you all the cash flows, just like discounting a project almost. And you're revising that anyway. So although it's something he doesn't ask an awful lot of, but although it's part of the syllabus, there's not really anything extra to learn. The next thing, which is very popular, it's almost certain to be asked, is foreign exchange risk. Which again you did a bit of in F9. I will remind you. I don't know if you remember forward rates, which were very easy. There was money market hedging, which was a bit messier. But at F9, that was it. At P4, they're still relevant, but there's a lot more numbers. We look at futures options. It's very much learning the rules. But there's a fair bit extra to learn there, and obviously I'll go through it. Okay? Nearly there. How many am I? Fifth thing, interest rate risk. Again, it's unfair because it was a while ago. But at F9, there was one chapter in the notes, but all he could ask was a little bit of written on it, and it was very rare. At P4, they can ask numbers. And again, most people quite like it because it's sort of learning rules, but they are quite messy numbers. Futures, options and things. And obviously I'll go through it. All right? Finally, I'll draw a line actually because it's a little topic all on its own. All of those, there's quite a lot under each heading, if you understand. Investment appraisal, although you've done it, there's dealing with inflation, dealing with tax, etc. Cost of capital, a lot of different things you can ask, and so on. But one little thing which is almost all on its own, but is actually pretty likely at P4, is something called option pricing. Which is very much using the formula, but it's a most extraordinary formula, but once you've got it, it's fun. And again, I'm not sure about you three, I think you three, but most people here are good at arithmetic. And I better check, I should have emailed, because it'll affect the order we do things. Have we all got a scientific calculator with us? Oh, good. Otherwise I'd have had to delay it till tomorrow. You will definitely need a scientific calculator for this exam. All over the place, but especially for option pricing, it would be impossible otherwise. But that's really, that's not everything in the syllabus, obviously. The syllabus itself goes on and on and on. But those are the areas. And there's no question. Almost all, if not all, the exam will be from those 6 things I've listed. Okay? That we've got to be happy with. A couple more general points. The layout of the exam, the style of it. I think you're used to the idea, but Section A is compulsory. And there are 2 questions. And he said in total it'll be between 50 and 70 marks. So it can vary, but in total 50 to 70 marks. So it's 2 big ones. Usually it's something like 2 30-mark questions or a 30-mark and a 40-mark, but 2 big compulsory, of which obviously I'll give you guesses on the revision, but almost always one of those is mainly a big discounted cash flow question. All right? But when I say big discounted cash flow, half of it will be setting up the cash flows, inflation, tax, everything else. To discount, you'll need the cost of capital. And so in the same question, you'll be working out your cost of capital, So it's almost certain to be at least one big one of those. And incidentally, it's not guaranteed, but one of those is usually in the form of a report. Which is a fairly minor thing. I mean, you all know report layout. Well, we'll check on the revision that you know a report layout. But you know about these professional marks business. Well, almost always there's one report. There's 4 marks guaranteed. So there's only 46 to go, Section B is your choice. You've 2 from 3. And you can work out for yourself. The 2 from 3, clearly they have to be equal marks. Think about that. And it depends how big Section A is. You see, if Section A is 70 marks, Section B is 30, which would mean there were 15 marks each. If Section A was only 50 marks. It can't be. You see, this made me laugh. Well, it can, sorry, I beg your pardon. If Section B is 50 marks, the other 2 must be 25 each. So they're equal marks, but anything between 15 and 25. All right? The most likely, but it's not really relevant, is that the 2 compulsory will be 70, and then it's 2 15-mark questions. Again, it's obviously 3 hours plus 15 minutes to read. Again, as you're used to in this sort of exam, it's sort of part written, part numbers. Part A, part B, part C. You know what I'm getting at? The emphasis is more in this exam towards numbers. But every question, you get your numbers bits, and then there'll be some writing about it. All right. Section B, though, one of them will be completely written. Which, of course, is the one that hardly anybody ever does. And actually, it's a very difficult one to guess, because the completely written one is normally on what you might call current business affairs sort of thing. And that's a very, very difficult thing to ever guess, especially because they're writing the exam a long time in advance. So what's happening in the world today wasn't what was happening usually at least a year in advance, But the sort of thing in the past has been things like writing about the effect of globalisation on businesses. Or, during the crisis, have you heard of the word quantitative easing? What it is, sorry, just very quickly, during the banking crisis and everything, to encourage people to spend, the governments in some countries, certainly in the UK and America, have been printing more money and putting more money into the economy. Yeah, to encourage people to spend and start business going again. But on the other side, there's a big danger that if they put more money into the economy, that you have big inflation. Well, that's the sort of thing. But it's almost impossible to guess what he's going to ask. And because there's so many things he could ask, you could spend 2 weeks, this is quantitative easing, this is, it's just a bit difficult. It's a very hard thing to guess or to learn as to teach. It's one of those where you see the question, if it happens to be something you're aware of, it's generally very easy marks. They always mark it very easily because very few people do it. If it's something you've not heard of, well, clearly you lose your choice, but the other 2 are more technique things that you've learned. Okay? If you're worried about that one, because I say it's impossible to teach. In an ideal world, you'd read the whole textbook twice and he'd still think of something that wasn't mentioned, If it worries you, do any of you ever see The Economist magazine? Because it's a very interesting magazine. They have film reviews and things. But they always have one article, Burton Wood, which is about things like quantitative easing. They're only short, they're quite easy to read. And they're quite nice articles, if you get the chance. What I'll do from now on, any week there's an interesting article that just might be relevant for the exam, I'll forward you a copy of it. But you have more important things to do. That's just might help with just one question. Okay? Anyway, that's the start of the exam. Finally, if you look at the notes, you get a formula sheet, page I. Yep. And quite a lot of those formulae you should recognise, again, however long ago it is. But the third one down, capital asset pricing model, you've seen. Asset beta model, growth model, weighted average cost of capital. There's a lot of formulae you have seen before. Clearly there are some new ones. And if you look at the last one on page 2, and some of you may have heard of this perhaps at university, but the Black-Scholes option pricing model, we'll go through it. It looks quite horrendous, but there's an ln there which is log to the base e. E is like pi, it's a fixed number. And you'll see somewhere in the last line, put called parity, e to the minus rt. We'll go through it later today. It is, sticking figures in a formula, but clearly it takes a bit of time to sort out how we use our calculator, let alone what all the symbols mean. Anyway, you get the formula sheet. You also get DCF tables. You've all seen those before, and you said, we all know how to use them. So there you're used to. Finally, though, and it'll make no sense at the moment, page V, you get normal distribution tables. I'll explain why and what they are when you come to it, but in fact, it's that option pricing formula I just mentioned. It's there that these tables are needed, and I'll explain why and how and whatever. Yeah. Again, some of you may have heard of normal distribution. The tables usually are completely different, but the way we use them, we use these tables. Okay? Anyway, they're given in the exam. We'll deal when we come to it. Very last of all, if you look at the contents sheet, it looks enormous. There are 27 chapters there, albeit 27 is just some financial management terms. It's more like a little index. So there are really 26 chapters of what you might call learning. However, although that looks enormous, it's not actually as bad as it seems, and there's no way ever, this is nothing to do with shortening the course, there is no way I would ever go through all 26 chapters, because an awful lot of them, I've made sure I put a chapter in for each syllabus heading sort of thing, an awful lot of them are little more than what you might call background reading. Almost half the chapters have no numbers at all. And they're very short. A lot of those chapters are just 2 pages. A bit of background reading. Where virtually none of them are a question of actually learning, but just background stuff for the written bits. Yeah? 1 or 2, in fact, are very basic P3 chapters. Now, I know you've not done P3 yet. You're doing it. Have you two done P3? Yeah? But it's very basic P3, whether you've done it or you haven't. It's very much common sense. It's the sort of stuff I could do, even though I don't do P3. Yeah? The idea that, we need a strategy. Yeah? I think you can talk about that without having heard of P3, sort of thing. But you're already aware, I think, in the P papers, they're allowed to ask anything from any paper. Well, they don't go and ask detailed P3 learning things, but you could always get a few marks at the end of a question. Things, you're wondering whether to buy a machine. You do all your DCF and everything. What other factors might you consider? Well, you might consider how it fits in with our overall strategy for the long term. Well, I honestly think that's more common sense than learning, quite frankly. So, one or two of the chapters are like that. They're just very, what you might call basic P3. But it's more background, it really is, than pure learning. All right? So, in fact, that applies to the first 6 chapters. The first 6 chapters are a combination of... when we finish tomorrow, I'll tick off which chapters, we've done, which ones you're going to read. Because the reading chapters, when it's only 2 pages and it's not theory, we're not going to stand here and read together. I mean, that is absolutely ridiculous. If it's theory, I'll deal with it. If it's reading, well, I'm sorry, you can read at home. I think I've typed beautifully. If you read it and it doesn't make sense, we can chat on the revision and sort it, but that's more efficient. You would agree? So that does apply. It really does to something like half the chapters. Also, I've already said, a lot of stuff you have done before in this revision. So although we'll have bits of revision, because there are some bits certainly where to jump in with the new stuff isn't going to make much sense unless we've checked some of the old stuff, Other bits, when it's pure revision, I'll leave you to work through the chapter yourself. And again, there'll be time to sort you, but I think you'd accept it. For instance, to spend half a day, which is what it would take, going through basic DCF, inflating, tax, discounting. Well, I really don't think, since all 3 of you have done it, we need to spend half a day revising all that. I think you should be able to revise that at home. And then we can concentrate on the revision, on the styles of questions, and using them to sort out any funny bits. Okay? She's looking to see all the ones I've crossed out there. Right. All right. And I'm going to... Well, so for that reason, there's no way we're doing all the chapters. The ones we are doing, I'm not necessarily doing in the order he's listed them. I'll do them in what I think is the most sensible order. Okay?